Week 13 waivers are way more important than they look. We're heading into the final playoff push. Trades are basically done. Bye weeks are almost over. And this is the point of the season where your bench can win or lose your year. Today, I'm going through every priority ad you need to know for this week, the stashes that actually matter, and the handcuffs who can turn into league winners overnight. Let's jump in. Alvin Kamara will likely miss time with the MCL tear, so Devin Neal is the next man up. Once Kamara got hurt in the first quarter, Neal was on the field for 86% of snaps the rest of the way. We'll probably see Andrei Iosivas active for their next game, but it was Taysom Hill who ran alongside Neal in this one at both running back and the quarterback position. He also got all the near end zone carries as well in this game, so keep that in mind on waivers this week. You might be able to get Taysom Hill for free, maybe start him at your tight end position, right? I would probably be treating Neal as like an RB3 flex play next week until we see that he'll receive like a lion's share of snaps and touches in Kamara's absence, but he should be definitely picked up on waivers. He was very involved and looked pretty good in the receiving game this past week. So, if you're wondering what kind of prospect Neal was, he was definitely more of a favorite from others than myself personally. He was like a classic volume over efficiency type of guy coming out. He racked up a ton of production in college. We're talking like 99 percentile type of production, cumulatively, right? Both in the rushing game and the receiving game, but was relatively average overall when it came to efficiency. At the end of the day, though, for a running back, volume trumps all, right? And it looks like he has a chance of getting a lot of volume moving forward, at least while Kamara is out. So 5 catches for 43 yards on 7 targets in this past game. That's pretty awesome. That's what you want to see, man. If something like that can continue, you're looking at a really high floor, and that can, add to some potential upside too. He ran a route on 73% of dropbacks in this game. I mean, that's really high. And if that usage continues anywhere close to that, he'll continue to get targets. Estime wouldn't be the one to take away that work. Now, it is worth noting that while he had an 18% target share in this game, he also saw a target on 30% of his routes in the game prior. We're looking at a, probably an RB2 ceiling here, but these types of situations don't grow on trees. You could have a potential RB2, maybe more of an RB3 for now until he proves he can be an RB2 for a couple of weeks, right? So we should be prioritizing him on waivers this week. I am willing to go, up to 30, 50% if you need to. If you don't necessarily need a running back right now, I don't know if I would be breaking the bank for Devin Neal. Okay, Raheem Mostert is next up. Ashton Jeanty had a late game ankle injury that caused him to miss the last few snaps of the game. So Raheem Mostert took over. There is a chance that Jeanty has to miss time. Not a lot of information on it right now, but Pete Carroll said that it's not overly serious. The question is it a high ankle sprain, right? If it is, we could see a few weeks of Raheem Mostert as the RB1 with new offensive coordinator, by the way, Greg Olsen. Chip Kelly just got fired on Monday. Olsen was actually the OC for the Raiders for 4 years between 2018 and 2021. He heavily featured the running back position. He heavily featured the tight end position. Okay, so for those who have Brock Bowers, this is kind of the move that you wanted to see. But Josh Jacobs, was the running back those 2 seasons, and the running back had a lot of usage in the receiving game just overall, not just Josh Jacobs. So could be good for Mostert, maybe even for someone like Dylan Laube. I'm not going out of my way to pick up Laube, but who knows how this backfield ends up shaking out. It could totally end up being a Mostert on early downs and Laube on passing downs type of situation. Zamir White will probably be active and get a few carries too, potentially, but Mostert should be the one to be rostered since he'll likely be the one to get the first crack at the job. Next up is Dameon Pierce. The Chiefs signed him. I have no idea what they envision for him, but when you look at what's on the roster and the lack of juice that's in the backfield, Isaiah Pacheco is expected to be back this week. The Chiefs play on Thursday. I can't imagine that they don't give Pierce a shot at making it on the field at some point over the next few weeks, practice squad, and then, I think he makes a solid stash for a couple of weeks. You just never know, right? We've seen time and time again on the Chiefs where there's a running back late in the season that makes a huge fantasy impact, whether it's Kareem Hunt after they re-signed him, or Jared McKinnon, or Spencer Ware, Charkandrick West, Damian Williams, right? Just remember, there were a lot of these guys, right? Now, and all these guys are basically just guys. So, while this signing might mean absolutely nothing, it could be something. I don't want to ignore it. Next up is Chris Rodriguez. He's like the more practical and easy to obtain running back on waivers this week. He was on bye, so either people didn't want to roster him through the bye, or they just forgot about him, or they just don't care about this backfield as a whole. But it's worth noting that he received 47% of the rushing attempts last week, with Bill Krasky-Merritt only receiving 28% of it, so he was the lead back going into the bye. Here's the problem though. He gets Denver this week, Minnesota the following week. So, solid stash, I guess, if you're light on running backs because they get the Giants in a couple weeks. If you're really in a pinch, you just need guys who will get some touches and have the goal line roll, which at this point is Rodriguez's job to lose. Next up is Bhayshul Tuten. Man, picking up Bhayshul Tuten last week and then, potentially starting him last week was so disappointing. Off the injury report going into the weekend, barely involved. I got way too hyped up off the first half of last week. Now, maybe he wasn't 100%, so they rode Travis Etienne, or maybe I'm coping. I don't know. Either way, I want to keep Tuten rostered for now if I have him. He was limited all last week. I want to see what happens when he gets some full practices in, whether he's more involved than he was this past week. Maybe this is just me speaking to myself and you guys don't want to hear any more about Bhayshul Tuten, and I would totally understand that. But honestly, I don't want to drop him just yet, and I do want to hold him. At the very least, he's one of the best handcuff options and best contingency running backs to roster. Let's move on to wide receivers. So let's start with Christian Watson. He didn't have the best day in the box score, and we talked about tempering expectations on him going into Sunday on our matchup show, but his utilization was really interesting. 88% route participation, 35% target share, both leading the team. Watson had a higher route participation than Romeo Doubs over the last 3 games. So he's out there running more routes than any other Packers wide receiver right now. He gets 2 great matchups over the next 2 weeks. Detroit in the Dome and Chicago at home. He'll be closer to being in my lineup than out of it for those 2 matchups. Next up is Kayshon Boutte. He is who he is. Long touchdown or bust. He's never received proper volume all year long. In that game stretch when he's been solid between weeks 6 and 8, he had 5 targets, 2 targets, 5 targets. But, he had good fantasy outputs, right? But against the Giants this week, a lot of single high safety coverage, right? That's why we liked Christian Watson 2 weeks ago, right? That's why we liked Jameson Williams this past week. A lot of single high safety coverage in this game. So get Boutte in your flex if you can. Keep in mind that he has a bye the following week, and then he has Buffalo the week after. So if you're not going to use him this week, it's not necessary to pick him up. Next up is John Metchie. Finishes a top 18 wide receiver 2 weeks in a row. And with Tyrod Taylor under center, he has a higher chance of continuing to produce. He tied A.D. Mitchell for the team lead in targets, but he caught 6 of 7 for 65 yards and a touchdown compared to Mitchell, who only hauled in 2 of his 7 targets for 42 yards. Mitchell is still very intriguing, but he seems to be the more volatile of the 2. He should also be rostered. But more so in maybe 14-team leagues or deeper. But Metchie ran around on 91% of dropbacks in this last game, 27% target share. So I think he should be on our radar and on our rosters in 12-team leagues to see if this sticks. Next up is Luther Burden. His new role as the Bears slot receiver stuck for the 2nd week in a row. Now, the role is only leading to a 61% route participation in each of these last 2 weeks, but he's been pretty explosive, gaining chunk yardage with his opportunities. If you're watching him play, you're like, yo, this guy is really good. 3 for 46 on 5 targets this past week, a run for 15 yards. He caught 3 balls each of the last 3 weeks, 3 for 51 2 weeks ago. So chunk gains here, right? And for a slot receiver, that's pretty good. I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up gaining an even bigger role moving forward, to be honest with you. It's not a sure thing, but he's just the type of talent that can explode out of nowhere. It's very possible he doesn't come through for us until next season. So I fully acknowledge that. But if you have the space, you're looking for some upside long term, he's someone you can stash on your bench. Let's talk about Parker Washington, still available in about 45% of sleeper leagues. No Brian Thomas Jr. this past Sunday again, so it was all Jacoby Myers and Parker Washington. Now, it's very possible that with the return of BTJ and given the return of Brenton Strange and him earning targets already, that Washington is the odd man out. But because the slot role is such a vital role on this offense, and by the way, he's going to continue to be the slot guy for the rest of the season, it's possible that he continues to get it done. So I'll hold him. 4 out of the last 5 games, including Sunday, he's been over 20% target share. He's finished as the top 36 wide receiver, in 4 of those 5 games as well. So I'm going to hold him if I have him. 4 out of the last 5 games, including Sunday, he's been over 20% target share, and he's finished as the top 36 wide receiver in those 4 games as well. Next up is Andrei Iosivas. No T. Higgins for the Bengals on Thanksgiving, and with Joe Burrow back, we should get some more stability at the quarterback position and on this offense overall. And last year, when Higgins missed games, both Iosivas and especially Mike Gesicki become solid streaming options if you need them. No teams on bye this week, though, so keep that in mind when you're grabbing these guys off of waivers. Next up is Tez Johnson. He can still be rostered. I wouldn't necessarily be dropping him just yet. Chris Godwin didn't make that much of a dent in his return, but he'll likely be a lot more involved next week when he isn't on much of a pitch count. He only ran about on 42% of dropbacks this past week, but his routes didn't come at the expense of Tez Johnson, who A, looked good, but also B, still ran a route on 84% of quarterback dropbacks on Sunday night. So if he's going to continue to be on the field with these guys, with Baker Mayfield, who seems to be okay, by the way, it's a mild AC joint sprain on his non-throwing shoulder, probably best case scenario. Hopefully he'll be able to play this week. He has a rapport with Tez, especially in the red zone, man. Tez Johnson caught Baker's only touchdown on Sunday. That's 5 touchdowns in his last 6 games. Okay, so there's a chance that it continues. Let's look at Greg Dortch, man. It looks like Jacoby Brissett is just making guys fantasy relevant left and right, dude. Like Trey McBride, Michael Wilson, and then Greg Dortch as well. 24% target share this past week. 2 straight games of 6 catches and a touchdown. They get Tampa this week, so it's a pretty good matchup. And even if Marvin Harrison Jr. comes back, it should be a competitive game. Also, the Bucs were giving up the 5th most fantasy points to slot wide receivers over their previous 4 weeks coming into week 12, so Dortch will have a matchup advantage. A bit of a desperate play, especially with Marvin Harrison Jr. back potentially. What I'm seeing right now, it doesn't even look like he's going to be back this week, so keep that in mind. But he's an option on the waiver wire if you're needy. All right, that's going to do it for the waiver wire segment. But now that we're getting into the part of the season where trades are coming to an end, fab reserves are getting low, no teams on bye this week in week 13, and the last bye week for teams is week 14, we have to make sure that we're loading our bench up with the top handcuffs. And the way I'm defining handcuffs on this list are running backs who are not overly rostered, meaning not much over 50% rostered in leagues, who are generally available on the waiver wire in most leagues, do not have any standalone value, and if they do, it's really not much. But guys who have the contingent upside if the starting running backs ahead of them go down. And then these running backs will get the majority of the work and become potential league winners. So I have these guys ranked in order of league winning upside. There are 2 ways to view handcuffs. One is to handcuff your own running back, right? And that's to play it safe so that in case your guy goes down, at least you have the guy to replace him. I'm cool with that at this point of the year, especially for the top guys. But there's also another point of view, and that's to roster other handcuffs of running backs who you're not rostering so that you're maximizing the potential upside, right? For example, you already have Derrick Henry and James Cook, but instead of rostering Keaton Mitchell or Ray Davis, you take your chances at another starting running back potentially going down, and all of a sudden you can now throw a workhorse like Blake Corum into your flex. And now your team is stacked with those 3 running backs. All right, hope that makes sense. Let's start with tier 1, and I'm going to start with Blake Corum. If anything were to happen to Kyren Williams, Corum steps into a near every down role on a great offense, and he showed that he can be productive with his touches. Not the best schedule coming up, but it's really about the quality of the offense with him. Next up is Bhayshul Tuten. Again, not much to say here, talked about him already, but he's looked great with his opportunities this year. The Jaguars' backfield has some of the best usage in the NFL. If something were to happen to Travis Etienne, he would have a great end of year with a pretty good schedule. Next up is Ray Davis. When James Cook missed week 6 last year, it was Ray Davis, not Tez Johnson, who got 23 touches and produced 152 yards with it. The game before that, Tez Johnson saw 3 carries and Ray Davis saw 0 carries. So we see this all the time. Some players' roles are to be role players. Johnson would stay in the same role he's in now to be the complement back. Next up is Brian Robinson Jr. He's also looked great with his limited opportunities this year. And on this 49ers offense, he will be yet another running back on this team who will get it done for you in CMC's place if he were to go down. So very solid schedule to close out the year. He's definitely somebody that should be rostered in all leagues. Next up is Tyler Algier. He's always been a premier handcuff over the last couple years. He's getting goal line touchdowns here and there, but he's only rostered in about 50% of leagues on Sleeper, and he's shown that he could be efficient with his touches and would be the primary rusher on an offense where he get a ton of volume. Let's talk about Keaton Mitchell. He's always been the direct backup to Derrick Henry. Justice Hill was always just a pass down back and the complement, similar to the Ray Davis, Tez Johnson situation in Buffalo. Mitchell is super explosive and does have the ability to be a league winner. We just never saw him get volume. He's also a smaller back, so I wonder how much volume they'd be willing to give him. Next up is Emmanuel Wilson. We just saw him get a ton of volume. He scored 2 touchdowns, but at the end of the day, he's just a guy, okay? Volume is king, though, at the running back position. He hasn't played extremely well or anything with his opportunities, and, with more volume, he can do well. If any running back gets 28 carries, they're probably going to do well, but I think he just got that type of volume because they knew that it was likely going to be a 1-game situation with Jacobs missing. Josh Jacobs went over 20 carries just twice this year. Still, Wilson should be rostered, especially through the Thanksgiving games, just in case Jacobs re-aggravates his injury. And then Chuba Hubbard. We saw him get the opportunity earlier in the year. He lost his job. He was pretty solid. He could serve as a solid RB2, maybe high in RB2 even. But the run game has really struggled over the last few games. Dowdle has had 53 yards, 45 yards, and 38 yards rushing over the last 3 weeks. And the schedule in the fantasy playoffs isn't ideal with Tampa and Seattle to close things out. We've seen what Sean Tucker has been capable of as well. So he's a solid handcuff to Bucky at this point. But keep in mind, he's going to share the backfield with Rachaad White and stick to that early down row. And that's fine if the Bucs offense is rolling and the matchups down the stretch in the fantasy playoffs aren't bad at all. New Orleans, Atlanta, Carolina. So he's definitely worth rostering, even though Bucky is going to be back this week. And finally, Ali Gordon. If anything were to happen to Devon Achane, he'd be the guy to roster. He's shown that he can get it done near the goal line, and the matchups aren't so bad to close out the season. Saints, Jets, Steelers, Bengals, and then Tampa in week 17, but not so bad. That's going to do it for this episode, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Happy Thanksgiving. Hope you guys get the dub this week, and let's make it to the fantasy playoffs, baby. I'll see you later. Peace.